relationship counselor Elizabeth Overstreet. Everyone has this vision in their mind of what marriage is, how romantic they want it to be, how they're going to raise their children, what the core values are going to be in that relationship. But often we don't tell each other totally what that vision is.
Welcome back to another episode of Bed Talks. We're welcoming to the show a psychologist. Welcome to the show, Amber. We are so happy to have you here tonight.
Yeah, thanks. I'm very excited to be here with you today.
When I noticed you on Instagram, where I find a lot of my great guests, by the way, I really appreciate people who put work into the content they put out, and that you can tell they're really educating and informing, and you're very good at that. For you, there was a post you did not too long ago about the 5 reasons people end up getting divorced. And I thought it was pretty interesting.
So these things do happen in happy long-term couples. They repair, and they're not the dominant communication patterns. Now, when these become the dominant communication patterns and they're happening often, or sometimes even not that often, depending on which one is used, it can really be disruptive. So the first thing is what we call harsh startup. So this is what it sounds like, starting a conversation harshly, harsh words, harsh tones. So you're coming out with criticism, you're coming out with contempt, you're treating your partner like not very well when you're starting that conflict conversation. The Gottmans talk about is the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So the 4 horsemen also overlap with that harsh startup. So they are criticism, contempt, stonewalling, defensiveness. So I'll define those. So criticism, pointing out a personality characteristic or a flaw in your partner. You're so lazy. There you go again, leaving the sock on the floor. Contempt, talking to your partner from a place of superiority, talking down to them. What do you think I am? Your maid? I'm not your mother. Pick up the sock off the floor. Third, defensiveness. What? It wasn't me. I didn't leave the sock on the floor. It was the dog. Maybe the kids did it. Or so we can be defensive in innocent victim, or we can be defensive in counterattack. Yeah, so I left the shoes on the floor. The sock on the floor, but you know what? You left the dishes in the sink. Okay, so defensiveness. And the last is stonewalling. So this is conveying your displeasure, disapproval through emotionally or physically disengaging from the conversation. So just staring at your partner back blankly, getting up, walking away. These things are highly predictive of relationships breaking down. They're really bad for relationships. So every couple is going to have conflict because you're going to have all sorts of unsolvable problems. But it matters how you talk to your partner, because these things erode the trust and the goodwill and the good nature in your partnership.
Why do you think there's a power struggle in relationships? Power with making decisions in a relationship where, or power with income. If you have a spouse or your significant other that's making more and you're not, there tends to be a power struggle, or both parties are they're in competition with one another. Trying to make the most, trying to do the most instead of really collaboratively working together. So power struggle simply meaning trying to control, both parties are trying to control one another, trying to control the environment, trying to control the family dynamic. And I know, when you have 2 people, yes, both should be working in unison, but unfortunately it's become a power struggle, not where you're actually working together, but you find yourselves working against each other. They say 2 heads are better than one, but only if those 2 heads are on the same page.
I believe that cross-culturally, there are times when there still are hierarchies in relationships, and that works for some couples. And then in other cultures and other relationships and other family systems, they don't want a hierarchy anymore. I tend to not take a position on what people should do in their marriage. I would take more of the position of, once they're in that marriage, how can I support them and how can I help them? I think if within your cultural system, if you have a perception of unfairness within that power system, whatever that is, that's going to erode trust. That's going to erode the feeling like we're in it together.
Maybe some of these hierarchies were very extreme. And so people, I just feel like that's how the world is a little bit. People tilt really far one way, and then the pendulum will swing back to the middle eventually.
Yeah.
And so that might be some of the shifts we see. And then I think also, like, people can make different decisions on both sides of the fence now, men and women, that they may not had access to before. And similar, there's women that are really climbing, right, the corporate ladder, or really positioning themselves career-wise. And when that happens, they have different exposure, right? You're looking at the world a little more differently than if maybe say you're in a generational family where the mom stayed at home, or where the mom didn't have access to that. So like your mom is still kind of saying, okay, this is the value system that worked, because maybe it worked for her, but maybe you could be pushing against that because you're like, man, I have opportunities my mother doesn't have. And I see this side of the world and these things I'm experiencing that I actually enjoy. So I'm trying to balance this with some of my traditions, right? And some of my cultural beliefs. So because I have friends like that where their families have certain belief systems around like, okay, you should be married by this age, have kids by this age, and so forth. And they struggle sometimes.
Yeah.
They do still, when you're raised a certain way, these things are ingrained in you. So
Mhm.
there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just there's other things that they may be interested in. So sometimes they often settle into the role for the most part, but sometimes there's a little angst because I think they're just experiencing different things.
Amber said this at the beginning, where you have two parties coming from two different cultures. In their minds, or honestly, based on how they were reared, how they were raised, they're both right. Whether
Yeah.
to my famous sock analogy, thank you. That it was okay for us to leave this, socks on the floor.
Don't get any ideas. Don't get
Oh well, no,
don't get carried away.
I'm not going down that hill. No.
I'm totally kidding, but no, it's true. I always often joke, like when you meet people, work with people in different professions and have different experiences, you're like, we all kind of landed in the same place and we all have different ways and a rhythm of how we operate. So it's
Yeah.
not one way that gets you there. It's multiple ways. And the proof is when you're, surrounded by people and you're in the same place, you're like, man, we're here, we're in this relationship together, but like we just are used to things being a little different. And when you dialogue versus getting into the gridlock, you do seek to understand, and you come from a place of seeking to understand versus judging the behavior. I think it shifts things because you're like, oh, that's why you're this way. Or, Kay and I would joke about that. As soon as we met each other's parents, we were like,
Mhm.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because you see the traits that are transferable, right? You have that aha moment. And then it's not so personal. You're like, they're not doing that to annoy me. That's just like how they were raised. There was something where you talked about like why couples have totally different reactions to the same argument. I think that's so interesting because like you can say something semantically in the same language, same tone you think, but someone could walk away with a totally different reaction to it. So what is, from what you've seen in your practice, why does that happen?
So in any situation, like we're human meaning makers. That's all we do. We make meaning out of everything. If we go to an art museum, we both look at it, you can hum and haw like, oh, did they use red there because it symbolizes power? Or did they just like the color red? And you're just talking about, no, that's the color shirt they're wearing that day. Who knows? We all look at things from different vantage points. And so it only makes sense that people are going to be the same. So what happens, when we do, we take in the data, and then our mind is like a computer. And then what it does is, you get that sensory input, and then you take your information in, and your information processor processes it, and it comes out with, some spat of what does this mean. But the problem is you and your partner have different information processors. What it means to you both is different. As a result of the different thoughts you both had, those different interpretations, the different meanings, you're going to have different feelings. So if one of you thought like sock, you're going to feel neutral. And as a result, your behavior is probably going to be to do nothing about it because you don't care, because it's a sock. Because how we think influences how we feel, which influences how we behave. So if I think sock and have a neutral feeling and I don't care, I'm not going to do anything, which is going to be different than if my other partner sees the sock and they think everything has a place. How could this be out of their place? They might feel frustration or rage, or they could feel unimportant. If they thought I'm just like, they don't care about me, maybe they feel unimportant. So they might behave in a way where they stomp over and they pick up that sock and they throw that sock so everybody sees the place that it goes in. Or maybe they turn to you and they go, how could you leave your socks on the floor again? We both encounter the same sensory data, the sock on the floor. But what that means to us in our information processor of our mind can be entirely different. And that's going to happen with every partner, with most friendships. It's going to happen all the time. We're going to have different meanings because we're just little human meaning makers.
It's been such a joy to have you on. We could go on and on for this stuff because me, I don't know about you, but I'm a nerd for this. Thank you so much for coming on. Why don't you tell people how they can find you, and if there's any new projects you're working on that you want to make people aware of, you can talk about that too.
Yeah, so as you heard, my practice is Amber Relationship Psychology, but my name is Amber. Amber with an A, Amber with an E, where you can find access to most of my resources on my website, so www.amberrelationshipsychology.com. One of the best things I have on there, while I have podcast, blog, therapy services, information, everything, I have a number of free guides and free resources, so go check those out. And then if you want to learn more about me, I'm most active on my Instagram, so my handle is at Amber Relationship Psychology, but www.amberrelationshipsychology will give you access to whether it's my podcast, free guides, Instagram. That would be the kind of hub where you could find it, and I can share those links with you guys if you want.
All right, that would be awesome. So thank you again for coming on the show. She was great, right? We enjoyed this.
Thank you, Miss Amber.
Yes.
You're very welcome. This is super fun.
Yes, we enjoyed you so much. So you guys, thank you for tuning in to this show. We hope you will walk away with some techniques for communication. Remember, get help sooner than later. And remember, we want a dialogue, not keep fighting. Amber, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Until next time, XOXO.